I woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of construction equipment rumbling through my quiet neighborhood in Gilbert, Arizona, and honestly thought someone was finally doing something about the perpetual dust problem we had in the development. What I did not expect was to walk outside with my coffee and see a brick wall being constructed directly through my backyard, sitting a solid 3 feet onto my property line. My name is Xavier Anderson, and I had lived in the Sunset Ridge community for about 5 years at that point. The HOA had always been a minor annoyance, the kind that sent passive-aggressive letters about trash can placement and demanded we use specific shades of beige on our houses. But this was something entirely different. This was a full-blown construction project happening on my land without so much as a courtesy knock on my door. I stood there in my pajama pants and t-shirt, watching 3 workers laying bricks while a supervisor checked measurements against what looked like architectural plans. My property backed up to the community common area, a stretch of desert landscaping that the HOA maintained with monthly fees that seemed to increase every year. But there was no mistaking where my property ended and theirs began, because I had paid for a professional survey just 2 years ago when I installed my pool. "Hey," I called out, walking across my lawn toward the construction crew. "What exactly is going on here?" The supervisor, a weathered man in his 50s with a clipboard, looked up at me with the expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation and was not looking forward to it. "HOA project, sir. We are building a privacy wall along the community boundary." "That is my property you are building on," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger bubbling up inside me. "My property line is marked by those stakes over there." I pointed to the survey markers that were clearly visible, sitting a good 3 feet beyond where they were building. The supervisor shrugged. "I just work from the plans I am given. The HOA provided the survey and the permits. You will have to take it up with them." I pulled out my phone and snapped several photos of the construction, the survey markers, and the clear encroachment onto my land. Then I went back inside, threw on actual clothes, and drove straight to the HOA management office located in a small business complex about 2 miles from my house. The office was one of those bland corporate spaces with motivational posters on the walls and the faint smell of stale coffee permeating everything. Behind the reception desk sat a woman who introduced herself as Patricia, the office manager. I explained the situation as calmly as I could manage, showing her the photos on my phone. "I will need to speak with the board president about this," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she dealt with angry homeowners on a regular basis and had developed immunity to it. "She is not in the office right now, but I can have her call you." "When will that be?" I asked. "Probably later today or tomorrow." "That construction crew is building on my property right now," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I need someone to stop them immediately." Patricia gave me a tight smile. "I understand your concern, Mr. Anderson, but I cannot authorize stopping an approved HOA project. You will need to speak with Karen Hartley, our board president." Of course her name was Karen. The universe had a sense of humor. I left the office and drove back home, where the wall had grown noticeably higher in the 30 minutes I had been gone. I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who I had used during my home purchase. He listened to my explanation and asked me to email him all the photos along with a copy of my original survey. "Do not do anything rash," Marcus advised. "Let me review the documents and we will figure out the best course of action. In the meantime, send a certified letter to the HOA demanding they stop construction immediately." I spent the next hour drafting that letter, being very specific about the survey markers, the encroachment, and the demand that all construction cease until the property line dispute could be resolved. I drove to the post office, sent its certified mail with return receipt requested, and then came home to watch the wall continue to grow on my property. By late afternoon, the wall was nearly 5 feet tall and stretched about 40 feet across what should have been my backyard. The construction crew packed up their equipment around 4 o'clock, and I took the opportunity to walk the length of the wall with a tape measure. Every measurement I took confirmed what I already knew. The wall was sitting approximately 3 feet onto my side of the property line. My phone rang around 6 that evening. The caller ID showed a local number I did not recognize. "Mr. Anderson, this is Karen Hartley, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA board." Her voice had that particular quality of forced politeness, mixed with barely concealed irritation, that I had come to associate with people who enjoyed petty authority. "Thanks for calling," I said. "I assume Patricia told you about the situation with the wall being built on my property." "Yes, and I reviewed our records. The wall is being built according to the survey commissioned by the HOA last month. It is entirely on HOA property." "That is incorrect," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have a professional survey from 2 years ago that clearly shows the property line. Your wall is 3 feet onto my side of that line. Mr. Anderson, the HOA board approved this project months ago. We hired a licensed surveyor to ensure accuracy. I am confident our survey is correct. Then you won't mind if we have an independent third-party surveyor come out and verify." There was a pause. "That seems unnecessary and expensive. The wall will be completed by the end of this week. I suggest you accept it." "I am not going to accept a structure built illegally on my property," I said, my voice hardening. "I sent a certified letter today demanding you stop construction. If you continue, I will take legal action." "That is your right, Mr. Anderson, but I should warn you that fighting the HOA is expensive and time-consuming. The board has significant legal resources at our disposal, funded by the community. Do you really want to spend thousands of dollars on attorney fees over 3 feet of desert dirt?" The implied threat was clear. They were betting I would back down rather than face a prolonged legal battle. Karen had probably used this tactic before with other homeowners who got tired of fighting and just gave in. "I will do whatever is necessary to protect my property rights," I said. "Stop the construction." She hung up without another word. The construction crew showed up again Wednesday morning at 7 sharp. I was ready for them, standing at the property line with my survey documents in hand. The same supervisor from yesterday gave me an apologetic look, but continued directing his crew. They worked all day, and by the time they left, the wall was complete. A solid brick structure painted in that ubiquitous southwest beige, sitting 3 feet onto my property and cutting off a significant portion of my backyard. Marcus called me Wednesday evening after reviewing all my documents. "You have a strong case," he said. "Your survey is solid, and I pulled the records on the HOA's surveyor. The company they used has had several complaints filed against them for inaccurate work. But here is the problem. If we go through the courts, this is going to take months, maybe over a year. In the meantime, that wall stays up. What are my other options? Technically, you could remove the structure from your property. It is an illegal encroachment. You would be within your rights to tear it down. Would not that open me up to liability? Possibly. The HOA would almost certainly sue you. But if your survey is accurate and you can prove they built on your land despite being warned, you have a solid defense. Plus, Arizona law is pretty clear about property rights. You are not required to tolerate trespassing structures on your land." We talked through the various scenarios for another 20 minutes. The conservative approach was to file a lawsuit and get a court order for the wall's removal. The aggressive approach was to hire a demolition contractor and send the HOA the bill. Both had risks, but the lawsuit route meant living with that wall slicing through my backyard for the next year or more while the legal system ground through its process. I spent that night doing research. Arizona revised statutes were clear about property encroachment and the rights of landowners to remove illegal structures. I found several case precedents where homeowners had successfully defended themselves after removing encroaching structures. The key was proper documentation and giving adequate notice to the encroaching party. Thursday morning, I called 3 different surveying companies and arranged for an emergency survey. I was not going to rely solely on my 2-year-old survey, even though I knew it was accurate. I wanted a fresh, independent verification with a timestamp showing the HOA had been given every opportunity to fix their mistake. The surveyor, a professional woman named Diana Rodriguez from Summit Land Surveying, came out Thursday afternoon with her equipment. She spent 3 hours taking measurements, checking boundary markers, reviewing historical records, and using GPS technology to verify every detail. When she finished, she showed me her preliminary findings on her tablet. "Mr. Anderson, the brick wall is definitely on your property. Based on my measurements, it encroaches between 2.8 and 3.2 feet onto your land, depending on where along the wall we measure. Your original survey was accurate. Can you have a full written report ready by tomorrow? I can have it done by tomorrow afternoon. It will cost extra for the rush. Do it." I paid her the fee and asked for 3 certified copies of the report. Then I called Marcus and told him what I was planning. He was quiet for a long moment. "Xavier, I have to advise you that this is risky." "Yes, you are legally in the right, but the HOA is going to come after you hard. There will be a lawsuit, probably harassment, possibly even criminal charges if they can make something stick." "Can they make anything stick?" "Probably not, but they can make your life hell trying." "Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked out my back window at the ugly brick wall cutting across my yard, at the 3 feet of my property that the HOA had simply decided to take because they thought they could intimidate me into accepting it. "Yeah, I am sure." Friday afternoon, Diana Rodriguez delivered 3 certified copies of her survey report, each one bound and notarized. The report was thorough and damning. It included photos, GPS coordinates, historical boundary data, and a clear conclusion that the HOA wall was built on my property despite the existence of clear boundary markers. I immediately sent 1 copy to Marcus, 1 copy via certified mail to the HOA office, and kept 1 for my records. Then I started making calls to demolition contractors. Most of the contractors I reached were booked out for weeks or wanted nothing to do with an HOA dispute. The 6th company I called, Precision Demolition out of Mesa, Arizona, sent someone out Saturday morning to give me an estimate. The owner, a straight-talking guy named Robert Sullivan, walked the wall and listened to my story. "I have done work in HOA communities before," Robert said. "They can be a nightmare. You are absolutely sure about the property line." I showed him both surveys, the original and Deanna's new report. He studied them carefully, took his own measurements, and nodded. "Yeah, they screwed up. This is definitely your property. I can have a crew out here Monday morning. We will need the full day, but we can take this wall down to the foundation and haul everything away. The brick can be salvaged, so I will give you a discount for that." "How much are we talking?" $4,200 for complete demolition and removal. It was not cheap, but it was a lot less than years of legal fees would cost. "Do it. Monday morning." Robert and I signed a contract right there. He asked if I wanted them to save the bricks for potential reimbursement from the HOA, and I said yes. We agreed they would be stored at his facility for up to 90 days while I pursued getting paid back. I spent the rest of the weekend documenting everything. I took videos of the wall from every angle, recorded its exact measurements, photographed the survey markers, and compiled a complete timeline of events starting from when I first discovered the construction. I also drafted a detailed letter to the HOA explaining that I was exercising my legal right to remove an illegal encroachment from my property, and that they would be billed for all costs associated with the demolition. Sunday evening, I sent that letter via email and certified mail to the HOA office, to Karen Hartley personally at her home address, which was in the HOA directory, and to every member of the HOA board. I wanted there to be absolutely no question that they had been given notice. Karen called me at 8 o'clock Sunday night, and she was furious. "Mr. Anderson, if you touch that wall, we will have you arrested for destruction of property." "The wall is on my property, Karen. I have 2 independent surveys proving it. You have been given multiple notices. The wall is coming down Monday morning. We will sue you for every penny you have. You are welcome to try. I will see you in court, and when I win, I will be asking for my legal fees, the cost of demolition, and compensation for my time and stress. You should really consult with the HOA's attorney before making more threats." She sputtered something I could not quite make out and hung up. My phone started ringing immediately with calls from other board members and neighbors who had apparently been contacted by Karen to pile on the pressure. I let them all go to voicemail. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures already climbing into the 80s by 7 a.m. when Precision Demolition's trucks pulled up. Robert had brought a crew of 5 workers, a small excavator, jackhammers, and a dump truck. I met them in my driveway and walked them around to the backyard. "Before we start, I need you to confirm one more time that you are absolutely certain about the property line," Robert said, all business now. "Once we start taking this down, there is no going back." I showed him the survey markers, the reports, and my documentation. He had his crew foreman verify the measurements independently. Then Robert nodded. "Okay, let's do this." The excavator rumbled to life and positioned itself near the wall. By this point, several neighbors had come out to watch, and I could see people taking videos on their phones. The first strike of the excavator's hydraulic hammer against the brick was enormously satisfying. Karen Hartley showed up about 15 minutes into the demolition, screeching to a stop in her white Mercedes SUV. She came charging across my lawn in her designer workout clothes, face red with fury. "Stop this immediately," she screamed over the sound of the machinery. "You are destroying HOA property." I walked over to meet her before she could get close to the work crew. "This is my property, Karen. The wall was built illegally on my land. I have given you multiple notices and opportunities to remove it yourself. Now I am handling it. I am calling the police." She had her phone out, dialing. "Go ahead. I have all my documentation ready to show them." 2 Gilbert Police Department officers arrived about 20 minutes later. Karen was still there, now joined by 3 other HOA board members, all of them trying to talk over each other while explaining to the police that I was destroying community property. The demolition crew had paused their work to let the situation sort itself out. I approached the officers calmly and introduced myself. "Officers, I am the property owner. This wall was built on my land without my permission, and despite multiple notices to the HOA. I have documentation proving the encroachment." The older of the 2 officers, whose name tag Reed Martinez, said, "Can we see that documentation?" I brought out my folder with both surveys, the photos, the timeline of events, and copies of all correspondence with the HOA. Officer Martinez and his partner, Officer Reeves, spent about 10 minutes reviewing everything while Karen continued her shrill insistence that I was a criminal. Finally, Officer Martinez handed my documents back. "Mr. Anderson, based on what you have shown us, this appears to be a civil property dispute. The surveys you have indicate the wall is on your property. We cannot prevent you from removing structures from your own land." "That is absurd," Karen shrieked. "The HOA built that wall. It is ours." Officer Reeves turned to her. "Madam, if you believe the wall is on HOA property, you will need to resolve this through the courts. But we are not going to stop Mr. Anderson from working on his own property when he has documentation supporting his claim. I want him arrested for destruction of property." "There is no basis for that," Officer Martinez said firmly. "This is a civil matter. You need to contact your attorney." The officers stayed for a few more minutes to make sure the situation remained peaceful, then left. Karen stood at the edge of my property, arms crossed, glaring at me while the demolition crew went back to work. She eventually stormed off when it became clear I was not going to be intimidated. The demolition took most of the day. The crew carefully dismantled the brick wall, separating the materials for salvage. The sound of jackhammers and the excavator echoed through the neighborhood all day. More neighbors came by to watch or ask questions. Most were supportive once I explained the situation and showed them the surveys. A few seemed to think I was being unreasonable and should have just accepted the wall to keep peace in the community. By 5 o'clock Monday evening, the wall was completely gone. All that remained was a line of disturbed dirt where the foundation had been. Robert's crew had hauled away the debris and graded the area, so it blended reasonably well with the rest of my yard. The salvaged bricks, several pallets worth, were loaded onto a flatbed truck for transport to Robert's storage facility. "All done," Robert said, handing me an invoice. $4,200 as quoted. "The bricks are cataloged and stored. If you end up not needing them, we can sell them and credit you back about $600. I wrote him a check and shook his hand. "Thanks for doing this on short notice." "No problem." I admire someone willing to stand up to an HOA. Those boards can get drunk on power. He handed me a thick folder. "Here is all the documentation from the demolition. Photos, weight tickets for the hauled material, storage receipts for the bricks. Everything you will need for your lawsuit or insurance claim, or whatever comes next." After Robert and his crew left, I stood in my backyard looking at the space where the wall had been. My property was my own again. The evening air was cooling down, and I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. I felt a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. I knew this was far from over. The HOA's response came faster than I expected. Tuesday morning, I found a notice taped to my front door before I even left for work. It was a formal violation notice stating that I had destroyed community property and was being fined $5,000 with an additional $500 per day until the wall was rebuilt. The notice also stated that my HOA privileges were suspended pending a disciplinary hearing, and that legal action was being pursued. I photographed the notice and emailed it to Marcus along with all the documentation from yesterday's demolition. He called me within the hour. "They are really going for it," Marcus said. "The good news is they don't have a leg to stand on. The bad news is they are going to make this expensive and annoying. I just got served with a complaint. The HOA is suing you for destruction of property, trespassing, and breach of the CC and Advocacy. They are asking for $50,000 in damages plus attorney fees. $50,000. The wall cost them maybe $10,000 to build. They are claiming loss of community value, emotional distress to board members, and punitive damages. It is all garbage, but we will have to fight it. I am going to file a counterclaim for trespass, illegal encroachment, the cost of your surveys, the cost of demolition, your attorney fees, and your time. We will also ask for an injunction preventing them from rebuilding the wall. How long is this going to take? Court date is probably 3 to 4 months out for the first hearing. Discovery will take time. If we are lucky and they see reason once they talk to a competent attorney, maybe we can settle this in 6 months. If they dig in, it could be a year or more. I spent that Tuesday fielding emails and calls from neighbors, board members, and people I barely knew from the community. The HOA had apparently sent out a mass email describing me as a rogue homeowner who had destroyed community property and was threatening the safety and harmony of the neighborhood. They conveniently left out the part about building on my land. Wednesday brought a new development. I received a certified letter from a law firm in Scottsdale representing the HOA. The letter demanded immediate payment of $45,000 to cover the cost of rebuilding the wall and associated damages, threatening criminal charges if I did not comply within 10 days. Marcus laughed when I forwarded it to him. Criminal charges for what? Protecting your property rights. This attorney is either incompetent or is just writing whatever his client tells him to write. Don't worry about it. I will respond. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, depositions, and mounting tension in the neighborhood. The HOA scheduled their disciplinary hearing for me, which I attended with Marcus. It was held in the community center on a Thursday evening, and about 30 residents showed up to watch the spectacle. Karen Hartley presided over the hearing with 4 other board members flanking her at a long table. She read through the charges against me in a formal tone, listing all the violations I had supposedly committed. Then she asked if I wanted to present a defense. Marcus stood up. Yes, my client has committed no violations. The wall in question was built on his property without permission, and despite multiple notices that the construction was illegal. Mr. Anderson exercised his legal right to remove an encroaching structure from his land. I have here certified surveys from 2 independent companies proving the encroachment, along with documented notice to the HOA. Furthermore, this disciplinary hearing itself is a violation of the CC and Advocacy because Mr. Anderson has been given inadequate notice and opportunity to prepare. And the board members conducting this hearing have a conflict of interest as they are also parties to the pending lawsuit. Karen's face turned red. That is not how this works. The board has the authority to enforce community standards. The board has authority to enforce legitimate rules, Marcus said. It does not have authority to build structures on private property and then punish homeowners for removing them. This hearing is a sham, and we will be including it in our lawsuit as evidence of harassment. The hearing devolved from there. Several board members tried to shout over Marcus. Residents in the audience started arguing among themselves, and eventually Karen just declared that I was being fined and that the matter was closed. We walked out, and Marcus assured me the entire proceeding was meaningless and would help our case. The lawsuit moved forward through the Maricopa County Superior Court system. Both sides filed motions, conducted discovery, and exchanged increasingly hostile legal briefs. The HOA's attorney turned out to be more competent than his initial threatening letter suggested, but he was working with bad facts. Every piece of evidence supported my position that the wall had been built on my property. In early June, about 3 months after I had demolished the wall, we had our first major hearing in front of Judge Patricia Morrison. Both sides presented their arguments. The HOA's attorney tried to claim that their survey was correct and that I had acted hastily without giving them adequate opportunity to respond. Marcus systematically destroyed each argument with documentation showing multiple notices, 2 independent surveys, and the HOA's refusal to even consider that they might be wrong. Judge Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who clearly had little patience for the HOA's arguments. After hearing from both sides, she issued a preliminary ruling from the bench. I have reviewed the surveys presented by both parties. Mr. Anderson's surveys appear to be thorough and professionally conducted. The HOA's survey appears to have significant flaws and was conducted by a company with a history of complaints. Based on the preponderance of evidence, I am finding that the wall was indeed constructed on Mr. Anderson's property. Therefore, he had the legal right to remove it. The HOA's claims for damages are denied. We will proceed to hearing on Mr. Anderson's counterclaims. Karen Hartley looked like she had been slapped. Her attorney tried to argue for reconsideration, but Judge Morrison cut him off. "Counsel, I have made my ruling. If you wish to appeal, that is your right, but we are moving forward on the counterclaims now." The hearing on my counterclaims was scheduled for late July. In the meantime, Judge Morrison granted our motion for an injunction preventing the HOA from rebuilding the wall or taking any retaliatory action against me. She also ordered them to immediately cease all fines and restore my HOA privileges. The HOA board, or more specifically Karen Hartley, did not take this well. Over the next few weeks, I noticed increased scrutiny on my property. Code enforcement officers from the town showed up twice to investigate anonymous complaints about my landscaping and pool maintenance. Both times they found nothing wrong. I received violation notices for supposed infractions like my mailbox being 2 inches lower than required or my trash cans being visible from the street for more than the allowed time, all of which Marcus told me were harassment and would further support our case. The breaking point came in late June. I came home from work one evening to find that someone had spray-painted "Lawsuit Loser" across my driveway in red paint. My security camera footage showed 2 teenagers doing the vandalism around 2 in the afternoon. I did not recognize them initially, but a neighbor who saw me reviewing the footage identified them as Karen Hartley's son and his friend. I filed a police report and provided the video footage. The Gilbert Police Department took it seriously, and 2 officers went to interview Karen. She denied any knowledge of the vandalism, but her son Brendan admitted to it under questioning. He claimed it was just a prank and that he was upset about the neighborhood drama. The police charged Brendan Hartley, who was 17, with criminal damage, a misdemeanor. But the investigation did not stop there. While interviewing Brendan, the officers found text messages on his phone showing that Karen had encouraged him to teach Mr. Anderson a lesson and had specifically mentioned doing something to my property. That elevated the situation significantly. Karen Hartley was arrested on a Tuesday morning in early July and charged with conspiracy to commit criminal damage and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The arrest made the local news, with footage of Karen being walked out of her house in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. The story spread quickly through the neighborhood and on social media. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Karen as president. She resigned from the board entirely shortly after. The new board president, a reasonable guy named Thomas Winters who lived 3 streets over from me, reached out to Marcus to discuss settling the lawsuit. "We have reviewed everything," Thomas said during a meeting at Marcus's office in Chandler. The previous board, specifically Karen, made a serious error. The wall should never have been built where it was, and we should have stopped construction as soon as you raised concerns. We would like to settle this and move forward." "What are you proposing?" Marcus asked. "We will pay for Mr. Anderson's surveying costs, his demolition costs, his legal fees to date, and $5,000 for his time and inconvenience. We will also issue a formal apology and acknowledgement that the wall was built in error. In exchange, Mr. Anderson drops his counterclaims and we all move on." Marcus looked at me. We had discussed settlement possibilities before. "What about the salvaged bricks?" I asked. "You can keep them or we can buy them back from you at cost. And no future retaliation. Absolutely none." "That will be in writing." We negotiated back and forth for about an hour. The final settlement came to $18,000. $4,200 for demolition, $3,000 for surveying costs, $8,000 for legal fees, $3,000 for my time and stress, and $1,800 to buy back the salvaged bricks. The HOA also agreed to send a community-wide email explaining that the wall had been built in error and that I had been in the right to remove it. The settlement was finalized in early August. I received a check from the HOA along with a written apology signed by the entire board. True to their word, they sent out the community email explaining the situation and apologizing for the previous board's actions. The email was surprisingly thorough, admitting the error and acknowledging that I had acted within my rights. Karen Hartley's criminal case moved forward separately. She eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received 2 years of probation, community service, and had to pay restitution for the paint damage to my driveway. Her son Brendan went through the juvenile court system and received similar probation terms. The neighborhood dynamics shifted significantly after everything settled. A lot of residents who had been on the fence or who had believed the HOA's initial spin on events came to me and apologized. Several people mentioned they had their own horror stories about Karen's time as HOA president and were glad she was gone. A few people remained hostile, convinced I had destroyed a legitimate community improvement out of spite, but they were in the minority. Thomas Winters and the new HOA board proved to be much more reasonable. They instituted new policies requiring board approval for any construction projects near property lines, mandatory independent surveys for major projects, and a formal review process for homeowner complaints. They also brought in a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, which reduced the opportunity for personal vendettas. Life gradually returned to normal. I used some of the settlement money to improve my backyard landscaping in the area where the wall had been. I installed a proper fence along the actual property line, made of decorative iron that matched the style of the neighborhood but left sight lines open. The HOA board reviewed and approved it without any issues. Marcus and I celebrated the settlement with dinner at a nice steakhouse in downtown Gilbert. "You know, most people would have just accepted that wall," he said over drinks. "They would have grumbled about it but figured fighting the HOA was not worth the hassle." "I thought about it," I admitted. "For about 5 minutes, but it is the principle. You cannot let people just take your property because they think they can get away with it." "Well, you made a point, and you got paid back for all your trouble. That is a pretty good outcome." It was a good outcome. More importantly, it sent a message that resonated through the community. Several other homeowners who had been dealing with unreasonable HOA demands suddenly found the courage to push back. The new board found itself having to review and reverse a bunch of questionable decisions made under Karen's leadership. One of the more satisfying moments came in late September. when I received a letter from the Arizona Association of Realtors. Apparently, my case had been written up as a cautionary tale in their monthly newsletter about HOA overreach and the importance of proper surveys before construction. Marcus had submitted the details as an educational example, with my permission. The article emphasized the legal risks HOAs face when they ignore property rights and try to intimidate homeowners. I ran into Karen Hartley exactly once after everything was settled. It was at a grocery store in early October. We locked eyes across the produce section. She looked away quickly and moved to a different aisle. I felt no particular animosity toward her at that point. She had brought her problems on herself through arrogance and the assumption that her authority as HOA president made her untouchable. The legal system and basic property rights had proven otherwise. My relationship with the HOA remained professional and distant. I paid my dues on time, followed the reasonable rules, and kept my property maintained. The new board left me alone, and I left them alone. It was exactly the kind of relationship an HOA should have with homeowners. Minimal, respectful, and focused on legitimate community interests rather than personal power trips. The incident did make me something of a minor celebrity in local property rights circles. I got contacted by a few other homeowners in different communities dealing with similar HOA overreach issues. I shared my experience and Marcus's contact information with them. Some of those situations resolved without litigation once the HOAs realized the homeowners were serious about defending their rights and had competent legal representation. In November, Thomas Winters approached me at a community event and asked if I would consider joining the HOA board. "We could use someone who understands property rights and is not afraid to stand up for homeowners," he said. I declined. "I appreciate the offer, but I have had enough HOA drama for one lifetime. You all seem to be doing fine without me," he laughed. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, the offer stands." As winter settled over Gilbert and temperatures finally dropped into comfortable ranges, I spent more time in my backyard enjoying the space I had fought to keep. The area where the wall had briefly stood was now covered in desert landscaping that matched the rest of my yard. You could not even tell there had been a dispute unless you knew the history. I thought about what I might have done differently. The confrontational approach of demolishing the wall had worked out, but it had been stressful and risky. If I had not had solid documentation and competent legal advice, things could have gone very badly. The safer route would have been filing for a court order first, but that would have meant living with the wall for a year or more while the case dragged through the system. In the end, I decided I would make the same choice again. Sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it is risky, even when people tell you to just accept the situation and move on. Property rights matter. Personal autonomy matters. The principle of not letting bullies win matters. The story made its way around my workplace too. I worked as a project manager for an engineering firm in Temp, and word got out about my HOA battle. My boss, a practical woman named Jennifer, called me into her office one day in December. "I heard about your situation with your HOA," she said. "Building on your property, you tore down the wall, made them pay for it." "That is accurate," I said, not sure where this was going. "I want you to know that kind of problem-solving mindset, standing up for what is right even when it is difficult, that is the kind of initiative we value here. You are up for a promotion next quarter, and this kind of thing reinforces my confidence in you." It was an unexpected benefit of the whole ordeal. I had not connected my willingness to fight the HOA with my professional reputation, but apparently other people had. The holidays came and went. The neighborhood put up its decorations. the HOA organized a reasonably pleasant community gathering in the park, and life went on. I attended the gathering and found myself welcomed by most of the neighbors. A few people mentioned they were glad the situation had worked out, and several thanked me for standing up to the old board. In January, about 10 months after I first discovered that construction crew building on my property, I received one final piece of correspondence from the HOA legal situation. It was a satisfaction of judgment document confirming that the settlement had been paid in full and the case was closed. Marcus had already confirmed this, but seeing the official document felt good. I filed it with all my other documentation from the case, which now filled an entire storage box. Surveys, photographs, legal filings, correspondence, news articles, police reports, and finally, the settlement agreement. It was a comprehensive record of what happens when an HOA overreaches and a homeowner refuses to back down. Looking back on the experience, several things stood out. First, documentation was crucial. If I had not kept detailed records, taken photographs, hired independent surveyors, and preserved every piece of correspondence, the case would have been much harder to win. Second, having good legal representation made all the difference. Marcus knew property law and HOA disputes, and he guided me through the process without letting emotions override strategy. Third, standing up to bullies works, but it requires commitment and resources. Not everyone is in a position to fight a lengthy legal battle, which is exactly why HOAs often get away with overreach. The experience also taught me about community dynamics. The neighborhood had been largely passive when Karen and her board were making unreasonable decisions. Most people just wanted to avoid conflict and hoped problems would not affect them personally. It took a dramatic confrontation and Karen's eventual criminal charges for people to really wake up and demand better leadership. That passivity is how petty tyrants thrive in HOA boards and similar small-scale power structures. By February, a full year after the wall incident began, life had completely returned to normal. My backyard was peaceful, my relationship with the HOA was professional, and I had a few extra $1,000 that I used to upgrade my pool equipment and add some new landscaping. The salvaged bricks that the HOA had bought back were presumably sitting in their storage somewhere, a physical reminder of their expensive mistake. I stayed friendly with several neighbors who had supported me during the conflict. We would get together for barbecues or pool parties, and occasionally someone would bring up the wall incident as a funny story, though it had not felt funny at the time. Remember when Xavier demolished that wall and the HOA president got arrested? It had become neighborhood lore. Thomas Winters proved to be a solid HOA president. Under his leadership, the board focused on actual community maintenance rather than petty enforcement and personal agendas. Dues were spent on things like park improvements, street repairs, and the community pool. Violations were handled reasonably, with warnings and opportunities to correct issues before fines. It was what an HOA should be. I also heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Karen Hartley had put her house on the market and was moving to another part of the Phoenix metro area. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy about that. She had made her choices and faced the consequences. Her moving away would probably be good for her and good for the neighborhood. In March, I got a call from a reporter at the Arizona Republic who was doing a feature story on HOA disputes and property rights. Someone had told her about my case, and she wanted to interview me. I agreed, and the article ran in mid-April. It was a fair piece that laid out the facts, included commentary from property rights attorneys, and used my case as an example of both HOA overreach and successful homeowner resistance. The article generated some attention. I received a few emails from other homeowners across Arizona dealing with their own HOA problems. I tried to help where I could, mostly by sharing my experience and emphasizing the importance of documentation and legal representation. I also heard from a state legislator who was interested in introducing reforms to HOA laws to provide better protection for homeowners. I gave him my perspective and some suggestions based on what I had learned. By summer, the incident was firmly in the past. My backyard hosted several gatherings with friends and family. Kids splashed in the pool, adults relaxed in the shade, and nobody mentioned walls or HOA disputes. It was exactly what I had wanted when I bought the house, a peaceful place to live with control over my own property. The final chapter of the story came in August when I received an invitation to speak at a local property rights advocacy group meeting. They met monthly to discuss issues ranging from eminent domain to HOA overreach to zoning disputes. I accepted and gave a 30-minute presentation about my experience, emphasizing the legal strategy, the importance of standing firm on principle, and the resources available to homeowners facing similar situations. The audience, about 40 people in a community center meeting room, asked great questions. Several shared their own stories of HOA battles. A few had won, some had lost, and others were still fighting. The common thread was frustration with the power imbalance between individual homeowners and HOA boards backed by community funds, and sometimes vindictive board members. One woman in her 60s raised her hand during the question period. What would you say to someone who is afraid to fight their HOA because they worry about retaliation and becoming a pariah in their neighborhood? I thought about that for a moment. I would say that fear is legitimate. Retaliation happens, and some people will judge you harshly for making waves. But I would also say that living with injustice because you are afraid of conflict is a terrible way to go through life. If something is truly wrong, if your rights are being violated, you have to decide whether you can live with accepting that or whether you need to fight back. For me, having a wall built on my property and being told to just accept it was not something I could live with. The fight was stressful and expensive and scary at times, but winning it and protecting my property rights was worth it. The presentation ended with applause, and several people came up afterward to thank me and share more of their own stories. I left feeling like maybe some good had come from the whole difficult experience beyond just my personal victory. If my case helped other people understand their rights and gave them courage to stand up to unjust HOA actions, then the stress had served a larger purpose. As autumn arrived again in Gilbert, marking a full cycle since the wall dispute began, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. My house was still my house. My property was still my property. The neighborhood continued its quiet suburban existence. But there were subtle differences. The HOA board was more careful and transparent. Homeowners were more engaged and willing to question board decisions. The community felt more like a collection of independent property owners cooperating on common interests rather than subjects of an authoritarian mini-government. Those changes, small as they might seem, mattered. I never did join the HOA board, despite a couple more invitations over the months. I preferred to remain an engaged but independent homeowner. I attended meetings when important issues were being discussed. I voted in board elections, and I made my opinions known when relevant. But I had no desire to be part of the governing structure. I had fought for my independence from HOA overreach, not for the opportunity to become part of the HOA myself. The salvaged bricks never came up again in any conversation with the HOA. I assumed they disposed of them or reused them in some other project. It did not matter. They had paid me back, acknowledged their mistake, and everyone moved on. In late October, I had my property surveyed again as part of a refinancing process for my mortgage. The surveyor confirmed that my property lines were exactly where they should be, with no encroachments, no disputes, and no ugly brick walls cutting through my backyard. The surveyor, a different company from the two I had used during the dispute, made a note in his report about prior survey work on the property and referenced the legal settlement. It was now part of the official record of my property. Previous encroachment by HOA removed per court settlement August 2025. That notation felt like the final punctuation mark on the whole story. It was documented, settled, and closed. My property title was clear. My rights had been vindicated. The system, for all its flaws and slowness, had worked. As I sit here now in my backyard on a pleasant February evening, about 2 years after that construction crew first showed up to build on my property, I can honestly say I am glad I fought. The stress was real, the risk was real, and there were moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. But ultimately, standing up for my rights and refusing to be bulldozed by an overreaching HOA was the right decision. The wall is gone. My property is mine. The HOA learned an expensive lesson about property rights. Karen Hartley faced consequences for her actions. And maybe, just maybe, other homeowners facing similar situations will hear this story and find the courage to stand up for themselves. That brick wall existed for just a few days on my property, but the principle it represented is timeless. You have a right to your property, and no one gets to take it from you just because they think they have authority. Sometimes you have to tear down walls, literally and figuratively, to protect what is yours. And sometimes, when you do that, you get to send the people who built those walls a bill for the demolition. The invoice from Precision Demolition, stamped, paid in full by Sunset Ridge HOA, sits framed in my home office now. It is a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when it is hard, even when people tell you to just accept the situation, can work out. Property rights matter. Personal autonomy matters. And sometimes, justice is served with a demolition invoice and a check in the mail.